Tonight, is it in or is it out? Mixed signals from White House officials on the need for a public insurance option.
What's most important is choice and competition.
I'm Russ Mitchell. Also tonight, on the day she was supposed to be married, the mystery of what happened to missing Yale student Annie Lee deepens. And dream dinners, the recession alternative to going out to a restaurant.
This is the CBS Evening News with Russ Mitchell.
And good evening. At the end of a busy weekend of protests and rallies, the White House tonight appears to be fine-tuning its message in the heated health care reform debate. At issue is the proposed public insurance option and whether it's still an indispensable part of a final health care deal. Kimberly Dozier in Washington has more.
A small but vocal crowd came to the Capitol today to show their support for health care reform. It was a counterpoint to yesterday's huge demonstration against reform, among other issues. But the politicians drafting the reform bills dragged the debate today back to the so-called public option.
Public option. Public option.
The public option.
Proposed government-provided health insurance.
He's a liar!
It's become a lightning rod for the president's critics. Many in yesterday's crowd think health reform in general and the public option in particular will create one more program to add to skyrocketing Medicare and Medicaid costs. The White House keeps trying to downplay it as just one aspect of a mammoth bill.
The public option is a means to an end, but it is not all of health care.
But the signals are mixed. The president backed it strongly at his campaign-style health care rally in Minneapolis yesterday.
I think one of the options should be a public insurance option.
And one of his top advisors repeated that today.
He continues to advocate it, and I'm not willing to accept that it's not going to be in the final package.
That's unwelcome news to one of the few Republicans working closely with the White House to pass a bill.
I urge the president to take the public option off the table because it's universally opposed by all Republicans in the Senate, because it is a roadblock to building the kind of consensus that we need to move forward.
The Senate finance bill she's helping to draft instead includes privately run health insurance cooperatives to cover medical costs. But many Democrats say this type of co-op is not an acceptable substitute for a public option.
It really doesn't work for health care. There's fewer than 20 in the country. There are only 2 that really work.
So although the White House keeps trying to downplay it, co-ops versus the public option is shaping up as an impasse that will keep complicating this debate. And the public polls show their skepticism about the cost of health care reform or even what the public option means. So expect to hear more explanations from the president in at least 3 health care events this coming week. Russ?
Kimberly Dozier at the White House. Thank you very much. A cloud of unanswered questions continues to hang over Yale University this evening. This was to have been graduate student Annie Lee's wedding day. Instead, it was another day of campus rumor and uncertainty as the search for the missing student goes on. Randall Pinkston has the latest.
In the heart of New Haven, Yale is one of the city's oldest institutions and one of the largest, with more than 20,000 students, faculty, and staff, and its own police force. But the mysterious and troubling disappearance of doctoral student Annie Lee, with intensive media coverage of the investigation, is most unwelcome publicity. In a series of emails, university officials urged the Yale community not to speak to reporters who can be very aggressive in situations like this, where there are more questions than answers. Many at Yale followed the directive. This group, for example, declined this reporter's questions.
It's not a matter for the news.
No. One crisis management expert says Yale is in a difficult position.
Instead of us thinking of an Ivy League institution and an excellent education, we're thinking about crime and safety.
4 days after Lee's disappearance, the university's police chief sought to reassure the Yale community.
We have many physical security items in place to help us with this investigation, to include over 70 cameras.
The concern reaches far beyond the New Haven campus.
Parents are calling in, checking, are you safe?
Today, authorities continue to work in the laboratory where Annie Lee was last seen. Authorities reportedly have discovered bloody clothing in the ceiling of the building. Published reports say the clothing is not Lee's. Investigators are also pouring through garbage at a Hartford waste facility looking for clues.
Are you at all nervous about walking around the campus and doing your day-to-day tasks?
No, I can't say that it's made me any more fearful, but I am aware that it has made others on campus fearful.
The FBI continues to head up the investigation, numbering some 100 law enforcement authorities from Yale, the city of New Haven, and the state of Connecticut in an all-out effort to find Annie Lee. Russ?
Randall Pinkston in New Haven, Connecticut. Thank you very much. In Texas, a dramatic rescue in Corpus Christi Bay. A Coast Guard helicopter picked up 2 men in a life raft after their boat caught fire. One man has burns over 20% of his body. And next up on tonight's CBS Evening News. As the U.S. commitment deepens in Afghanistan, chaos surrounds the vote counting and the disputed presidential election. Overseas, an Afghan official claims about 50 Taliban militants were killed this weekend in a battle with U.S. and Afghan forces in western Farah province. The battle followed an ambush that left 3 U.S. troops dead. As the vote counting continues, Afghan officials say President Karzai is still ahead in the disputed presidential election, but UN-backed monitors say many of the votes may be worthless. Mandy Clark has more.
The Afghan elections were expected to be a battle between President Hamid Karzai and the former Foreign Minister Abdullah Abdullah. Increasingly, it's become a standoff between Karzai and the international community. Back on election day, U.S. officials called the Afghan vote a success in the face of Taliban intimidation. But now it's becoming an embarrassment as evidence of mass voter fraud mounts. International monitors are calling for a recount and have already asked for nearly 30,000 votes to be examined, with many more expected. We went to see election officials counting the vote. They assured us they had already set aside thousands of questionable ballots, putting them in a locked quarantine room. But when we looked inside, we found nothing.
Empty. Yeah, nothing is here.
How come it says quarantine boxes and there's
But
nothing
still we
here?
don't have here.
Did you ever have quarantine boxes in here?
Yeah, but we submit them, I think, on the next building.
We were taken to a warehouse full of ballot boxes, yet when pressed, officials admitted these weren't the quarantine boxes either. Then the story changed entirely. Suspect votes were not quarantined, we were told, but entered in a computer system. The Election Commission says a recount could take months, but in reality that's a veiled threat, because the longer they delay, the harder it will be to hold a second round of voting this fall. Security is an issue, but the bigger problem is the weather. Soon, large parts of this mountainous country will be cut off by snow, forcing a second vote further into the spring. That would leave the country without a legitimate leader for nearly a year and jeopardize the U.S. mission here.
While we are talking about this political crisis in Afghanistan, Al-Qaeda and the Taliban leadership are still active. They are probably planning more terrorist attacks, not only in Afghanistan, but probably in the United States.
This is not the battle President Obama wanted to fight in Afghanistan, and it could threaten the success of the new U.S. strategy here. Mandy Clark, CBS News, Kabul.
In Libya, doctors say the condition of freed Lockerbie bomber Abdel al-Megrahi is rapidly worsening. Megrahi returned home last month after he was freed from a Scottish prison because he had terminal cancer. His release caused an uproar among families of the 270 people who were killed in the bombing. Coming up on tonight's CBS Evening News, the great financial meltdown. 1 year later, what lessons have we learned? President Obama will travel to New York tomorrow for a major economic address a year after the collapse of Lehman Brothers. 1 year ago this weekend, the U.S. Treasury, the Federal Reserve, and the world's biggest banks faced the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. The 158-year-old investment bank Lehman Brothers was on the brink of failure after bailing out Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac the week before and Bear Stearns the previous March. The federal government decided not to rescue Lehman. That decision set off a chain of events which nearly brought the world financial system to a halt. A few days later, insurance giant AIG nearly collapsed and had to be rescued. Credit locked up around the world, and financial markets tanked, deepening a recession that had begun 10 months earlier. Treasury Secretary Henry Paulson went to Congress to ask for a $700 billion bailout for the nation's banks. The crisis spurred calls for financial reforms, few of which have been instituted. Joining us for some perspective on the financial crisis and its aftermath is banking analyst Dick Beauvais. Good evening, Mr. Beauvais.
Good evening.
We appreciate you joining us tonight. Let's go back just a bit. How did we get to the point where we face this horrendous financial crisis?
Well, I think, most simply speaking, we had loans growing at rates 3 times faster than income for a 5-year period. And if you keep growing loans at a faster and faster pace than you're growing income, obviously you're going to reach a point where income is not enough to pay the debt service on the loans, and you're going to start to have a collapse. And we had a collapse.
Taking a look at what the governments did, the bailouts, et cetera, do you think the government did the right thing at the right time?
No, I think the government was stretching. It was trying to figure out what was going on in the financial system. It didn't have a real good feel as to how bad or deep the crisis was, and because of that, it let Lehman go. I think if the government understood what the result of letting Lehman go would be, they would not have let that happen.
As we discussed, there are calls out there for financial reforms. These calls have been out there for some time. Few of these have actually been instituted. Do you think regulation's a good thing at this point?
No, I think it's a terrible thing. I think that we are in a situation where either the regulators do nothing or they overreact. And after having done nothing, they're now overreacting. And as a result of overreacting, I think they're going to basically harm the U.S. economy and the financial system.
Banking analyst Dick Beauvais, thank you so much for your insight. There was no shortage of capital at a Southern California border crossing this weekend. U.S. officials seized $500,000 in cash from a duffel bag in a car that 2 brothers were driving to Mexico early yesterday morning. The men are charged with smuggling. And still ahead on tonight's CBS Evening News, a visit to a city where real estate is still booming. In a sign of escalating trade tensions, China will look into what it calls dumping of American auto and chicken products after the U.S. imposed a new tariff on Chinese tires. China's economy has weathered the world recession well, and in one major Chinese city, the real estate market is booming like it's 2007. Here's Terry McCarthy.
But I like this area for the...
She loves it. He thinks the 3-bedroom apartment at nearly $500,000 is overpriced.
厨房呀，厨房。
Bill Yu, a software designer, and Lydia Wang, a TV producer, have a new baby and are looking for a bigger place. But unlike the U.S., China has dodged the recession, and property prices are soaring. In Shanghai, according to this realtor, this year they've already gone up by 20 to 30%. Yes, he says, it's a little bit crazy. So crazy that ordinary people are struggling.
We think we are kind of middle class in China. If the people like us cannot buy a property, who can buy it? Only the bosses or rich people can do it.
With the stock market up 70% this year, there are plenty of rich people around. Shanghai is China's version of New York City, a center of finance and entertainment where everyone wants to live. Predictably, that's driving real estate prices sky high. Although average Chinese incomes are less than 1/10 of what they are in the United States, an apartment in this downtown complex will cost you $5 million. Chinese have one of the world's highest savings rates, but have only been allowed to buy their own homes in the last 10 years. Money has flooded into property. The authorities know the risks of a bubble and a U.S.-style crash. So they regulate.
The Chinese government has been very, very conservative when it comes to lending. If you're a first-time home buyer, you have to put at least 20% cash down. If you're an investor, the minimum is usually about 40%.
Foreclosures, almost unheard of.
China's situation is different. Still not totally free capitalism market because the government has some invisible hands behind.
Sometimes not so invisible.
Yeah, that's right.
The Liu family are going to wait to buy because they think prices will come down this winter somewhat. Nobody thinks Shanghai will ever be cheap. Terry McCarthy, CBS News, Shanghai.
There could be another celebrity adoption in the works. After going to an orphanage in Ukraine this weekend, pop star Elton John said he'd like to adopt one of the youngsters. He said a boy named Lev has, quote, stolen his heart. And just ahead on tonight's CBS Evening News, the takeout stores that make anyone a gourmet chef. For many Americans short on time and money, getting the family around the dinner table for a home-cooked meal is no easy task. But as Ben Tracy tells us, there's a bright spot for busy parents struggling to answer that age-old question, what's for dinner?
Hey girls, you want to know what we're having?
Like many Americans, Gianna Kingsley and her family are eating out less, eating in more.
Okay, 2 minutes.
But Gianna's need to save money did not make her a better cook. So once a month, she comes to this Dream Dinner store in Los Angeles, where the chopping, pouring, and sorting are already done for her. Gianna just follows the recipes, adjusting ingredients to suit her family's tastes. The meals are sealed in containers and later stored in her freezer.
I just watched you do this, and it took about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Could you do that at home?
No.
There are nearly 700 of these so-called meal assembly stores across the country. At Dream Dinners, a typical entree serving 6 people, not including side dishes, costs about $26, an average of $4.25 per serving.
If I go to the grocery store and I buy a week's worth of meals, I'm going to spend, I don't know, $200 a week. Here I spent $160 to $180 a month.
Wow.
Yeah.
The wow factor goes up when customers buy in bulk, and that's gradually increasing sales. In July, Dream Dinners had $2.9 million in sales, $208,000 more than last year.
You are the only guy in here, so you get bonus points.
I'm often the only guy in here.
For stay-at-home dad John Ray, quick prep meals not only make sense financially.
In terms of time saved, that's really where the value is.
To save even more time, some people are skipping meal prep altogether. A report found that 3 out of 5 consumers say they're spending more money on supermarket prepared foods than they did just 2 years ago.
So I'll spend $4 to $5 on a decently portioned salad versus going to a restaurant and getting the same size portion and spending $12.
While some call it cheating, for parents, it's all about reclaiming the dinner hour.
The point is to sit around the dinner table and connect with their kids.
This is very good.
They just need a little help getting there. Ben Tracy, CBS News, Los Angeles.
And that is the CBS Evening News. Later on CBS 60 Minutes and an exclusive interview with President Obama. Thanks for joining us this Sunday evening. I'm Russ Mitchell, CBS News in New York. Katie will be here tomorrow night, and I'll see you again first thing tomorrow on The Early Show. Good night.